Yeah.
All right, awesome. So, Quetzal, thank you very much for agreeing to come onto my podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I recently stumbled over your Instagram profile and looks super interesting. Like you have some interesting content there.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm
Tell me,
grateful.
tell
Yeah,
me,
I just
yeah, tell me how this all started. Like where are you from? What you do? You know where your interest comes from, in terms of the things you do and you practice, etc.
okay. Yeah. So I mean, I grew up in California. I'm Mexican heritage. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so my parents, they're born and raised in Mexico. They actually live in Mexico. So um, yeah, I was just raised in California, and at some point in my journey, I just got introduced to food and nutrition as a, health, as a way to get to health, optimal health, and just to that brought me to an awareness of life that I wasn't previously aware of. I just felt like I was just walking around, just like unaware of everything that was happening. So at that time, my brother introduced raw veganism to me, and I completely adopted it from one day to the other. I just
When was
stopped
that?
eating.
When was that? What time frame were we speaking about?
Um, that was maybe like 9 or 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that was a while ago. That was like the beginning, I would say, where I really started to change my lifestyle and look at things differently as something that I could embrace as a committed lifestyle. So that was the beginning of it. Just, I started eating raw vegan foods, like just plant foods, fruits, stuff like that. Um, and then somewhere along the journey, I got into really fasting
Mm-hmm.
and doing all kinds of detoxing, like doing cleanses, and got obsessed with that side of things, and just really went deep on that. And I did like 40-day water fast on multiple occasions. I
40. Was it 40?
Yeah,
Four
40
zero.
days, 40 just water.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That sounds quite, yeah, I don't know,
it,
taxing.
yeah, well, it was definitely very taxing. It was very it's a process, like you really have to be committed to do that. Just like anybody, even like if you're an extreme athlete or something, that's taxing too, but like I think people perceive a value in something, you're gonna try to accomplish it. So like at that time, I perceived, well, fasting was a gateway to health. And so I was reading books and stuff about fasting, how fasting could heal the body. So I wanted
Right.
to make sure that I healed myself to the best capacity possible. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought, doing the 40-day water fast was the route to go. So I was doing things like that. I was doing all kinds of cleanses and stuff. But then I stumbled around, I
Real,
stumbled on
real quick,
information.
sorry for interrupting you, but how
Yeah.
long have you been raw vegan at that time?
Um, About 2 years. Yeah, I was like about 2 years just strictly raw
Right.
foods and fasting and doing all that.
Fasting
And then
plus raw veganism. It's like, a thought that crossed my mind is, when I'm thinking about veganism, it's like I'm comparing veganism with a fast because your body has such a hard time dealing with this sort of food because of the matrix and the low bioavailability of nutrients, etc. And so now
yeah,
you're adding additional fasting to your baseline fasting diet, which is, raw veganism.
right.
And so 2 years. How did you feel after those 2 years?
To be honest, like I never really felt great, but I always there's this conversation that happens in the vegan community that I'm very familiar with, where it's like if you don't feel good, it's like, well, you're just detoxing, you need to keep going, or
That's
you're
quite
not doing it
hilarious,
right,
right?
so that's how I interpreted it at that time too. Like I just said, oh well, it must be I must just got to push through and keep going. But from the beginning, I didn't really feel good because it took a toll. I was working a warehouse job at the time, like doing 12-hour shifts, and doing fasting and like trying to live off watermelon and just fruit. And I would just be in the aisles while I'm picking these heavy ass packages, and I would just be like on my on the forklift, just like trying to get myself together because I was not feeling good. So I know a lot of people have the experience where they say they feel good for a certain amount of time
Yeah.
and then they crash. I never really felt good and optimal. But I just kept going. Like that was my persistence because I was committed to this idea that this was the right way to eat and that I was healing my body.
And
At
how was
some
your
point
diet?
it
How was your
did.
diet before that? Because that's oftentimes maybe a important point to bring up. Because oftentimes people transition from a standard American diet or a baseline crappy, unhealthy diet with lots of processed foods. They get rid of that processed foods and introduce all these plant foods, and suddenly they obviously feel better because they lose a bunch of weight. They maybe have, compared to their previous diet, their now their nutrient status has improved maybe. Um,
Right.
so how was it in your case then?
Before that, I was actually I was working out and I had like a regimen where I was doing a bunch of small meals where like it was like chicken and
Mm-hmm.
fish and like rice. So I was preparing like my own meals. Like I wasn't but then I had like cheat days where I would just go crazy and get pizza and all this stuff and just stuff the heck out of myself.
Right.
Um, but I wasn't aware of like food from a health perspective. I was just doing it more from just calories, like just counting calories, trying
Oh yeah.
to balance out my weight. So yeah, so after going through that process, I came across some information about just basically gave me a new perspective on veganism that it showed me that look, the only reason you're able to do this is because you have a grocery store like that's giving you all these
Oh.
produce year round. And then I started learning about traditional ways, indigenous traditional ways of eating, which included animal foods. Traditionally, every culture throughout time has always consumed animal foods, and it's
Mm.
been something that's been highly prized. And so when I started to look at all that information, it just kind of contradicted everything that I was doing in a sense, but I wasn't ready to implement it at the time. So it took me about 5 years of like of
Mm.
sitting with that information before I was like, all right, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna actually start eating animal foods. But that's how deep the programming was for me and that's why I think that the content that I make is to kind of try to break that program and that spell for other people, or at least plant the seed because I know that that's what did it for me. So yeah, so then I started learning about that and just seeing the world differently through a different lens, that this new movement was not what I thought it was, and it was something that was
Veganism.
actually right, right.
Mm-hmm.
It started something that, and then you started to see like it started as it gained popularity, it became like, well, you started to see products and celebrities pushing it, and all these
Mm.
things started to coalesce to where I started to see, oh, this isn't what I was doing it for. This is something else now. This is just like another ploy that they're using to market and sell products to people. These supplements, I had all the superfoods, and then I started looking into the superfoods. Superfoods are superfoods to us because we don't know them, but where they come from, they're just regular. Like if you go to South America and you get an omelet berry or something, that's just something that they eat and they might casually eat it, but you bring it to the United States and you make it a powder and all of a sudden it's a superfood and you could sell it for profit, right? But it's like these
Right.
foods are traditional foods that have been eaten throughout time, like but because we're not aware, they can market it to us. And so I just started seeing all the angles as far as from marketing perspective and all this and what it was becoming. It wasn't what I thought it was because my goal originally was to get closer to nature.
Right. And I mean
So I thought,
the cognitive dissonance is so striking because on the one hand, the vegan people, the vegan community prizes kind of this whole message of ancestrally consistent diet, natural foods, plant foods, whole foods, whatever, for the animals, like kind of doing the best thing, virtue signaling, being morally superior, whatever, like all these kind of stuff. But on the other hand, now they need to rely on supplements. That's kind of the one thing. Second thing, they need to rely on these superfoods, which are being shipped from all over the world. It's not even local. It's not even
right.
seasonal. It doesn't make any sense. Like if you just come from that perspective, and now how you're able then uh, to kind of combine these things and make sense of it,
Right.
right?
Yeah. So it just made me realize that it was highly dependent on like this system like that I was bringing in the food, and that was I had all these pieces together to make it complete. Because if you relied on just what was available around you and you only allowed plant foods, it would be very limited, right? But if you bring in foods from other places and you have supplements, it makes it more possible, more tangible. But then I started to say, well, if you include animal foods and you eat what's local around you, that makes a lot more sense, because
Mm-hmm.
animal foods are really, it's just a lot of dense caloric energy. So if you can incorporate that, like, you can actually live off what's local in your environment a lot
Right.
more easily than if you were restricting yourself to just say plants. So from a like a sovereignty perspective, from a just local perspective, like it just made a lot more sense as well. So yeah, I started connecting all those pieces together, and it just made sense. Yeah.
It's yeah, it's really crazy, and I've been talking over the past few months to, or the past 2 years even maybe, to increasingly larger number of people who have transitioned away from veganism, and the most interesting thing that I find talking to these people is the ideological aspect of things. It's like they start telling me these stories of how they were so blinded with all this messaging and virtue signaling, and and I want to ask you about that because I find that I believe, at least that's my perspective, that many vegans start going down that path from an ethical standpoint. So kind of this
Mm,
health message, that's not always the initial intention or the motivation of behind going or transitioning to veganism. So it's oftentimes the idea of, okay, I want to help the planet, I don't want to be responsible for killing animals, etc. So
yeah.
did you? The question that I have is, did you also have that as a part of your motivation to before you went vegan, and then how were you able to kind of, what's a good way to phrase that, to so how were you able to be able to overcome maybe this feeling of guilt that you
Mm,
I don't know if you had that, so you could tell me about that might accompany your journey of transitioning now away from veganism, because now you're responsible for the death of
yeah.
animals. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I just think that I was able to see what was really happening. So it's like the guilt is an illusion, and the lack of
Okay.
guilt is an illusion as well. So they're both. It's just all an illusion because you don't really know what's happening. Like
Mm.
anytime you're buying food at the grocery store, you don't know really where it comes from. So this idea that you can just go into a grocery store and shop from the produce aisle and everything's gonna be fine, like nothing died, like
Mm.
that's an illusion,
I've heard a good quote.
because
I've heard a good quote. I'm not. Are you familiar with Brian Sanders from Food Lies? He's
yes, yeah.
right. He's a good. He's a great podcast. He does that movie, etc. And a quote. I don't know if it was a quote from him or from one of his guests. Was basically something along the lines of, if you have a vegan plate in front of you, there was this quote. It's blood on a plate. No, it's death on a plate. There's just no blood. So
Mm,
that's that.
right. Yeah, so I think that that illusion has been sold to a lot of people, and it feels like it makes sense, but it really doesn't translate to reality because, like one thing I like to say is, like, the closer you get to the land, the more you will understand. And that's something that I see consistently. Like, people, when they actually go to farm, when they actually go to grow food, they start seeing what it takes. They start seeing they have to kill pests. They start seeing they have to do certain things to keep the crop alive, and there's a byproduct that happens that includes death, whether you're growing plants or animal foods. Like, there's death in that process. So
Right.
I realize there's no escaping it, and I think that this is what we're trying to do, that we become aware that life is a certain way and we don't like it and we're trying to change it. Like, we see that life includes death and we're trying to run away from it rather than trying to face it head on and embracing it and realizing that it's a part of the mechanism of life. Like, we need to have death in order to feed life. If things don't die, then that's a problem. And so
Yes.
that's where it clicked for me, like, oh, so we're not supposed, it's our we don't have a good relationship with death. That's the problem. It's not that death itself is a problem. It's that we don't have a good relationship with death and an understanding of it enough to move through work through our life in a way that helps us to appreciate a
Where do you
life
think that
because
comes from? Why do you think we have such a distorted relationship, or such a wrong, in, I don't know, distorted idea of death, and how, we kind of associate it with something that's reprehensible, no matter what the motivation behind it was. And so
Yeah.
kind of, that's the idea behind veganism. So,
Well, because
mm,
the more we insulate from, we exist in worlds where we don't have to really see and deal with death.
right,
So like you think about like when people are getting older, we put them in institutions just like, oh, you're getting close, so we don't want to really see that. And then when people are sick, we put them in hospitals, we close the curtain. It's all, and even caskets, like you put them in caskets, or there's a murder scene, you cover the body. It's all, we're always trying to hide like death. Like we
right.
don't want people to be aware like this is something that happens, because we don't be want to be reminded of our own mortality. But I think that what that does is that it programs us to create ideologies that don't really reflect real life. So now you
Mm-hmm.
start thinking, well, maybe we can eat a certain way that nothing would ever have to die. And so we
Yeah.
get these utopia like ideas that don't really play out in reality. And so that's where I think this veganism program comes from, is this idea that we can potentially eat a certain way or live a certain way that could never harm anything. And I just think that that's not possible, and that's just not the way life works.
Yes, and I mean I've recently stumbled over an interesting study actually that looked at the number of, I don't know, living organisms, or I don't know, animals, something like that, that died for a certain amount of, I don't know, I think it was grain protein, something like that, compared to the same amount of like beef protein. I think that comparison was made, and there was like a huge number of animals that died more, like 20 times or so more animals died from the, if we compare the amounts,
Hmm.
just looking at monocrop agriculture that we, apparently, or probably obviously, uh, rely most heavily on. And so, I mean, even if you want to come from that ethical perspective, it, like, even that falls apart right in front of your eyes, just if you
Yeah, and
present them with that evidence.
then you got to ask the question, well, how does it work? Because like, is there a hierarchy? Like, is a mouse's life worth less than a cow's
Oh, that's
life?
interesting. Yeah.
And so it's so how are we tallying up this death? And when you look at how people like in that community view life, there's always this idea of sentience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, if it's sentient, then we shouldn't kill it because it's sentient. So, and then I asked, what is sentience? Sentience is something that we have the capacity to express. So when we see other animals who have the capacity, we want to preserve that. So that's kind of like the source of that is a self-preserving mechanism that we project. Like we're projecting ourselves onto the animal.
Yes.
Like we want to save it because it shares a quality that we have. But then you start to see as the animals or the organisms start to look less like us, there's less of that compassion because there's less of that shared characteristic.
Absolutely.
So, for instance, like a plant would get less compassion, even though have been studies about how there's consciousness and some sort of awareness within plants,
Right.
but because it doesn't share and express it the way we do, there's less compassion for that thing. And then there's like, oh, well, it doesn't have a nervous system, doesn't feel pain. No, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel
Doesn't
pain
look
the way
like
you
us.
might.
Doesn't look like us.
Right.
Even
It, does-
that.
it might not feel pain the way you feel
Oh,
pain, but
right.
there's definitely stress signals. We know cells have stress signals. There's stress throughout all life. In organisms. So you start to see this hierarchy that's kind of built in that community. That at the top of that seems to be humans, and the closer you get to that, the more worthy you are to preserve that. So it's like you're right. Like there is death even in the growing of agricultural plant crops.
Mm-hmm.
But so why aren't we tallying that up? Like if you take one animal and that provides food for many months, uh, that is more sustainable than
Exactly.
that's less death than if you were to grow plant crops and having to kill a lot of
A
smaller
bunch of animals and like
organisms.
insects. Like insects is an interesting thing because why wouldn't they shy away from killing a mosquito or like some other tiny damn insect that's bothering them in that moment? Like that would be totally okay, totally fine. It's also an
Right.
animal. Like where do you draw the line? And that's again a point that shows me, okay, we have some serious cognitive dissonance going on in this sort of, I don't know, ideology, however you want to call that, whichever term you would like to use. But it's really striking to me, and that's why I find it extremely difficult to engage in conversations with actual people, with people who are actually like completely committed to that thing. You know?
Yeah, yeah, it's because yeah, there is this ideological commitment. And it's just the world that we exist in. You know, I think that the more you kind of get into the land, into the natural processes, and get closer to your food, you just start to get more comfortable with that reality. But because we're born in these insulated environments, it's just hard to understand what our ancestors understood, and even what like farmer people understood, like that have to see life being born, and then they have to take life and make it food. You know, like it's just a different, more grounded perspective on life. You know, I think that it's easy to sit in New York City eating your fruit and be like, oh, the world would be better if everybody just ate like
Oh
me.
my God,
And it's
yeah.
like, you know what I mean? And it's like crazy because they'll condemn the hunter gatherer who's self sustainable and much less of a burden on the planet. Actually, probably,
100%.
yeah. They'll look down on them because they're eating fruit in New York City in their petroleum fueled globalized food supply
Right.
diet. You know, and it's just so crazy to me. So like I think a part of it is also just humbling them through the creating the understanding and just being like, that's, look, it's fine if you want to do that, but just understand that you're not going to get what you want from the planet. And it's just so crazy to me because
You still there? What's going on? Oh man. Yo, Quetzal. Lost you. Mm. So, I've lost you for a sec. And now I have two
oh
pictures of you
yeah,
in front of me.
oh, what happened?
Wait. What's going on here? Did you? Okay. Oh, let me try this out. No. So I have like the one version is still lagging, and now I've you joined me again.
Let me hang on.
Well,
Hopefully it's not three now.
well, it's still the same. Let me close the room and open it again, and then we can just move on from there.
Okay.
All right. All right.
Oh man.
What? That's interesting because I have again two. Like Quetzal is twice, and then in one part of the desktop. Oh yeah. Okay. Now here we go. Now it's gone. Okay, we're
Oh,
back.
okay.
Don't know what happened. So we're back now. I guess we're talking about the dissociation um, that oftentimes accompanies veganism, basically, and how these people seem to be completely dissociated from the real world and from what's actually going on. And you brought this funny example of someone eating a piece of fruit. I don't know, some tropical thing, something that never grow in the USA. I don't know, papaya, mango, and being like, oh, these pathetic hunter gatherers. It would be so much better if they would all be vegan for the planet.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's just like it's just kind of ridiculous when you think about it. But I just try to have compassion, understanding. One, because I've been that person in a way, but also because I realize that what's happening is they're being fed information. Like these documentaries, a lot of them are very emotionally captivating. So they
Mm.
captivate people's emotions, and when you have people's emotions, you can basically get them to do and believe and support pretty much anything. But a lot of times their information is not grounded in reality, and even the facts can be distorted.
Yes.
I've seen people go back and break down a lot of these documentaries, like whether it's Cowspiracy or what's the other one?
The
I
Game
don't know. It was
Changers.
right,
And
right.
then there is What the Hell. Like, there's so many of them.
Right. So it's like a lot of it is like half truths and things that are misinterpreted. And but if you kind of motivate people's emotions, they're not going to look further into that. They're just going to take that for truth, and then they're going to find things that support that. So, you just kind of create these echo chambers in these communities where people are just regurgitating the same things. And it's like, I've heard all of it. Okay, meat causes cancer, or meat
Right.
causes mucus. Like, you humans are made to digest meat. Like, there's all these things that people just say, like they never tried it or really looked into it, but because they become, they that's like what they're armored with, or what they're equipped with. Like, here, take this out into the world. Anytime, just spew this. Just say meat causes diabetes or
Right.
whatever. But it's like there's not really a deep understanding of it, or how it works in terms of like our physiology, in terms of our, anthropological history. There's just so much evidence to support the fact that we're here is kind of testament to that we've
Right.
eaten animal foods, like in the animal foods can and do produce healthy human life throughout multiple generations.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have that kind of evidence for veganism because it's so new. Like, we don't
Mm-hmm.
have like a history of people who have subsisted off of nothing but plant foods over enough generations to say that this is a viable option for people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And quickly getting back to the comment that you made about the things that they kind of the same arguments that they make over and over again.
Yeah.
There is no thinking through process in these individuals. They kind of buy into that ideology and just com- continue to make everyone makes basically the same arguments. It's like you don't even have to listen to that one person. You can listen to one sentence that comes out of the mouth, and then you know what they're gonna say next for the next entire hour.
Right.
Because it's not that they really thought that through thoroughly enough, because the arguments are all the same. That's kind of that interesting thing. And I recently had another interesting discussion with a good friend of mine about like ideologies in general, and what he told me, which I found pretty interesting, was that worth mentioning fact about ideologies is that people that buy into certain ideologies, they are able to take counter arguments that you present to them and just, first of all, completely dismiss them. But what is also particularly interesting is that they take them and twist them around so that suddenly they might even support their own ideology.
Mm.
So that's kind of such an interesting
Right.
point. If you have a vegan and you argue with them or discuss something with these people, you can make all the arguments you want. And in the end, they are always going to win.
Yeah.
Kind
Right.
of.
And that's kind of like the thing where you start to realize like that these conversations are really, sometimes you have to know when to just walk away from conversation because it's not
Mm.
really gonna get anywhere. You're not gonna it's not they're not gonna be the defining point where anybody's like, oh, you know what, you're right, like, let me change my mind. Like, it's just gonna be like, this is what it is until the death. And anything you say, any evidence that I already, because even when it comes to studies, right, like you can say, well, check this study out. Yeah, but that study was,
But I have this
funded.
study. What are you saying
Right,
now?
right. Or that study was funded by
Right.
somebody who had vested interest, and so that's why those numbers
Right.
came out. So it's like, there, at some point you have to realize like that there's no point in arguing, because one, the person's not ready to change their mind. Like they're not ready to change their mind on it. They have that going in, and they're going to come out with that understanding. So yeah, it's just interesting because I just think that these ideologies, they become part of people's identities. And when we have to really analyze, like, what is your goal, like what are you trying to do, because you're not vegan, like you're just identifying with being vegan at this moment, right? Like there
Right.
was a time in your life when you weren't vegan, and there might be a time in your life when you're not vegan anymore,
Mm-hmm.
but right now you're just highly caught up with this label and identity, and you're not able to see the world through any other lens than this lens, and that's stopping you from potentially learning some new information that might enhance your life. And if your goal is to better yourself, to better the
Right.
world, to do all these things, don't you want to be more open-minded, because there might be some flaw in
Mm.
what you're currently embracing. And so I think that for a lot of people, like for me, like my goal was to connect to more to nature.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of why I was doing veganism, because I thought it was like the natural diet, right? So
Yes.
at some point when I learned, well, there's some other information of how traditionally people have been doing things, I was like, okay, let me adopt that now, because I'm not gonna hold on this movement as much as
Mm-hmm.
I am on trying to get closer to nature and do what's natural. And so I think people conflate the two. Like they think they veganism equals natural, and at some point, like it just doesn't. Like you start to see the clear divergence of these two ideas, and in some point they almost kind of become polarities. They become opposites in some way, where this veganism is kind of like artificial,
Mm-hmm.
and nature is like the opposite of that.
Well, clearly becomes the opposite of that because again, these people are often exactly those that have never visited a farm, that don't really know where a, you know how the animal is being raised. Like if you look at like of farmers that are doing regenerative agriculture, stuff like that. So if they really would connect with the original sources of their foods, if they would know where their food is coming from, they would probably make completely different decisions. And as you said, if we just look at the research of how we were built the way we are built evolutionarily, then again you would also come to a completely different conclusion. And so I want to get your take on one thing, because it went, at first into a very interesting direction, which was that these people identify with a certain ideology, and that becomes very dangerous because they might risk losing this at one point in time, and then they'll be completely lost. And so I have a question for you. So,
Mhm.
how much do you think ideologies or something approximating ideologies is inevitable in human nature? Because I I found myself thinking about that question a lot and discussing it with a couple of friends, whether kind of religious thinking or ideological thinking is an inevitability for human nature. And if we transition too
Mhm.
much away from religion, then we find ourselves attaching ourselves and identifying more and more with these attractive ideologies, because we need to look at our world through some lens. There must be some set of values that we need to adapt that will guide our way of going through life. And so, what do
Mhm.
you think about that?
Yeah, I love that question. And I thought about this, and so it's just, I think it goes back to the environment, right? So we live in an environment where we can just focus on ideologies for much longer and in much more depth than we've traditionally been able to. So even if though we had beliefs that we've always had beliefs, we might have like this idea, this concept of um, of spirituality and traditional indigenous people who looked at the world a certain way, but they still had to embody and take action on a day-to-day life, right? They still
Mm-hmm.
had to move through the world every day and face the tangible parts of life. Whereas in today's world, like a lot of the ideologies aren't necessarily built off of real world experience
Mm.
and because that's why I look at it. It's like we always interpreting the world around us. So we might see a bird and that's a totem in nature, right? So that's an interpretation. We make it mean something. Oh, we see a albino animal and that's a spirit that we might interpret to give it some sort of meaning, but that's still through a real world experience. It's not like I'm sitting in front of my phone learning about how before time, like we were fruitarian and we only ate fruit and we lived in the Garden of Eden. That's the ideology that's been imprinted through somebody else's view of the world, or something that was conjured up in insulation from the natural world. Like that's what I'm trying to get people to understand, that a lot of these ideologies, they come from people that aren't in nature, that are insulated themselves, and then we spread this insulated ideology into the world, and it doesn't really reflect anything natural. So all the spiritual beliefs and ideologies that we at some point encompass came from our understanding of our experience. Even if we looked out into the cosmos, we were actually looking out into the stars. It wasn't like we were looking into a YouTube video telling us to about the stars. You know what I'm saying?
I
So
see.
so the
I see.
ideologies are kind of like third party ideologies. They're not firsthand
It's
experience
something
interpretations
that
of the world.
that didn't develop as a result of us experiencing the world in a certain way and making kind of our own conclusion about the way the things that we see and encounter, and the conclusion that we uh, you know draw subsequently.
Exactly. So it first came through books, right? Because books was like and writing was the first form of media that could do that. That was like you can read somebody, and now you could gain like a third party understanding of the world, and then with the internet and all of that got kind of amplified, and as they
Right.
create these digital platforms where they're going into the metaverse, it's going to become more and more detached. So ideas
Right.
don't have to reflect real world experience. They can just be uh, embodied through in the mind. They don't have to reflect reality. And even now, we can shape our experience through the digital world to start to bring some of those ideas to life that would never manifest in real life. So you're going to start to see how people are going to start to believe these ideas even more, because the digital world is going to make them more real, even though they would never manifest in the real world, in the natural world. So we're going to pull out, and my belief is that at some point people are going to come out into the real world and see the real world as an alternative world,
Right.
because they're so sucked into these artificial worlds like the internet and these in the metaverse and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's a pretty, like, I find that to be, personally, to be a pretty unfortunate sad thing to watch, that what's happening around us in terms of what you just described with the metaverse and this whole detachment from the real world out there. And I mean, civilizations and all that, they certainly have produced you know things, and have, I don't know, like, we've made some great progress as a human species in terms of, I don't know, technology and all that. And so
Mhm.
how would you reconcile, the on the one hand, the inevitability of using technology for, like, things of making podcasts, using social media, I don't know, do you have YouTube? Do you use YouTube? Oh,
Yeah.
not using YouTube, but I know, upload on YouTube. So YouTube, like all these social media platforms, doing all that. But on the other hand, the danger that comes along with it, of losing the natural sense and the connection with the real world, with nature, and with the idea of where we really come from. So
Right.
it's two very polarizing themes, and it's difficult to reconcile them, I believe.
Well, the way I personally do it,
Mm.
and I believe that this is what allows me to still be on the internet and do all these things, is because I'm sharing the natural world through the internet. So it's
Haha.
like I'm using it as a way to get people back into the natural world by showing them what the natural world is and what the benefits that they could get from connecting with the natural world. So that people do look at it as kind of some sort of contradiction or paradox when they see me like, oh, well, if you're all about nature, why are you on this phone? Well,
Haha.
first of all, like I'm I am just like everybody else. Like I come from the same world. Like I wasn't born in the tribe in the middle of the jungle, not aware. Like this is a world I'm familiar with too. But at the same time, I am trying to embody and embrace nature. But I want to make sure that I still have a connection to humanity through this device, and that I can offer value and connect with the world. I just don't want to be in the middle of New York City doing it. I want to be able to, still have natural spaces around me, and then use the internet to connect through these devices to offer this message to people. And even in the metaverse, I still would be open to creating a type of content that would remind people of nature through any type of of technology. I think that it's just important that we share the message, because if we walk away from it, it's like, well, people don't know about it. So you
Right.
have all these people who go out into nature and they build themselves a cabin in the middle of the woods and they never talk to nobody again. It's like, well, that's cool for you, but then nobody knows what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and the knowledge and wisdom that you gain, you can't share it with people.
Yeah, the message doesn't spread if you just completely lose any connection to the civilized world whatsoever. Like, depends on,
Right.
like, it clearly depends on what you see your kind of like purpose, mission, whatever you want to, whatever term you want to use for that. But
Yeah.
I believe that we all share that deep feeling to, I don't know, do something meaningful that not only impacts our lives but also people around us. And so I think that we all would feel better if we would embrace something like that. And I believe you're doing a good thing by using that as means to reach more people and spread the message. So I don't know. What do you say to those people? Like, how much? That's an interesting question. How much how much backlash do you get for anything you say, or is there more positive comments or more negative comments? What would you say? What are your reactions to your posts and to your content usually like?
Yeah, I think I see both. It's pretty balanced in terms of like in terms of people kind of challenging what I say, and also people feeling liberated by what I say, because I think that a lot of people share these thoughts and might even be practicing certain things that I talk about, but they don't share it with people because maybe they created a platform that was built around veganism and their social media presence. Like they don't want to share that they're eating meat because they don't feel comfortable sharing that with their audience. So when they see somebody like me give a talk about it in a way that's more closely relating to how they see life. So, like the spiritual aspect of it, the health aspect of it, all these things come together and it makes them feel like liberated. But then you also have the people who I believe, in a sense, they understand what I'm saying, but there is that dissonance to where like they don't want to accept it. So they kind of challenge it. But in a way, they almost want me to convince them to to change the way they're doing, but they want to be convinced through this articulation of this battle on comments and stuff, and they want me to basically defeat their old ideology so that they can adopt a new one. That's kind of the sense that I've gotten, because a lot of people have come and at first they're really challenging everything, and then next week like they're like, hey, I started eating animal foods again, and like they're so they were like just looking for me to like defeat their old ideology so that they can adopt a new one,
Mm-hmm.
or just a new perspective of looking at the world. But yeah, so I definitely sometimes I put more energy on the people that challenge me, because it's like, well, the people that agree with me, well, okay, cool. Like that's not really content that I can make, but I think where there's a lot of content opportunity to make is like with the people that go against what I'm saying, because if they have that thought, I know a lot of other people have that thought. So they might say, "Oh, we're not meant to eat meat and digest. It doesn't digest well." So now I have to make a video on that explaining why that's not a true statement. But the people that
Mm-hmm.
agree, well, it's like, well, thank you. I appreciate your
Right.
support, but I can't really make a lot of content with that. It's just like, well, I'm grateful for it, but
Yes.
there,
Yes.
what in the misunderstandings is where there's the most opportunity for growth.
And probably that's because we are more inclined to focus on the negative part of things. I believe also that's part of our evolutionary I don't know, programming, if you like, simply because the world was always more rough, intense, and evil and malevolent than it is right now. So we probably in the Western societies live a pretty comfortable, in my opinion, maybe even a way too comfortable life. Like I would like,
Especially
okay,
for men.
yeah,
I
Tell me
think
about
especially
that.
for men, we have the predisposition to have to keep an eye out, like because we're traditionally been the force that kind of protects the village in a way. So
Exactly.
we have this instinct to where we're always got our head on a swivel. We have to be able to recognize cues of danger much more so than maybe the women or other members of the group. But so it's like we're on this protective mode. So it's like anything that might pose a threat to the tribe or the community, we have to be able to pick up on. So yeah, even from a traditional evolutionary perspective, I think that that makes sense. And it's also like from a spiritual perspective is that's your shadows. Well, the things
Mm.
you're good at in the light, of course that's easy to embody and embrace that, but with the shadows, the things that are you really it's hard to see, or there's darkness there, like that's where there's more room for growth, and that's really where a lot of the work lies, and that's really where you find a lot of the parts of yourself that you need
Yeah.
to find yourself to really embrace and be who you are.
Like even psychologically, you could expand that to other areas of life too, but even psychologically for yourself, things that your dark things, dark I don't know, traits, whatever that lurking, underneath whatever is superficially visible to the outside and even to yourself, maybe something that's lurking the subconscious. Um,
Right.
that might manifest itself as like, okay, let me give you an example. So let's think about compassion. Compassion is often used to signal virtue. Look how compassionate I am. I'm caring about all these animals and all these living organisms. But I believe, like, look at the I don't know, in the animal kingdom, at mothers, they're very compassionate when it comes to their children, to the baby children, like a bear,
Hmm.
the baby bear. The mother is extremely compassionate, but the mother, the bear mother, will rip you into pieces. So I believe there's like always two sides to this virtue signaling, and that's what you need to integrate in your shadow. Because if you just look at compassion and trying to 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 tell that people and show that to people, show them how great you are, without clearly understanding that this comes along with a profound sense of hate towards those that violate your sense of compassion, then that might
Hmm.
manifest itself in ways that you maybe don't want to manifest. So that's a
Yeah,
dangerous thing that people might not realize.
and it's kind of clear that that's what you see too, even in because I often ask myself, why is there so much animosity in a movement that is supposedly trying to accomplish peace, and harmony in the world? Why is there so much animosity in this movement? So you kind of do get this kind of contradictory sense of like, well, you know, why are you guys throwing buckets and yelling at people and throwing buckets of blood on people and to
That's
try
what
to
I'm.
like.
That's what I'm talking about. That these people are they seem to be unbelievably compassionate when it comes to these tiny animals. But if it actually comes to human beings that are not in 100% alignment with their ideology or with the things they put forward, they will
Right.
rip them into pieces verbally.
Mm,
It's quite intense, or at least
yeah,
there are many interactions like that.
yeah, for sure.
Right.
Hey, brother, I got like 10 minutes.
All right, all right. So we will. I want to ask you a few more questions about. So we could obviously go for much longer, and I believe there is probably time later to do another part where we'll
Yeah,
maybe
for
go a bit
sure.
deeper about your philosophy when it comes to your lifestyle. Like we went pretty deep into the ethical side of things. I believe that's a pretty important topic for people because I believe that's where many people are confronted with plant-based diets and the vegan ideology at
Hmm.
first. So I've talked to many people that were vegan or are vegan, and it's oftentimes the most important argument they put forward is the ethical side, and then all these kind of apparent health benefits get added to that story, and it's get presented in this beautiful bundle. Here, take it, and you'll
Well,
be the
well,
best, moral superior, etc.
and that's the interesting thing. When you look at veganism and the movement, it's like it seemingly has absorbed every movement that humanity cares about. So it started
Yes.
as an ethical thing, then it absorbed like health, then it absorbed like sustainability,
Climate.
then it climate change. It absorbed every cause, and so it became like this
It
this,
literally
this
absorbed everything. So maybe, oh, that's so hilarious. Did you watch the Oxford debate about going beyond meat? Did you, by chance, by any chance?
right, the
With
lady that
Michaela
was
Peterson, and there was
basically
that lady.
yes,
It was
yes,
it
yeah,
was
yeah,
more than hilarious. Like she put every she used every point, every
right,
term there
but
is to describe, I don't know, this white supremacy, privilege, whatever
racism,
thing,
yeah,
racism, and tried to tie it all together to her message
right.
that we should go beyond meat. Like I haven't seen anything more hilarious than
and
that.
and it's kind of like it reminds me of like a fake burger. Like that's kind of what they do with that, right? They try to put all these things together to make
Yes,
it
yes,
something that's substance that you want to eat, but it's like no, I
yes.
don't.
Fake ingredients,
I
all
see
these
what it
fake
is.
ingredients.
Right, right.
But yeah, it was really so hilarious because I thought about it a lot after watching that video because I just tried to find out how on earth was she able to to tell this message under an umbrella of you know going beyond meat. Like how could you possibly make sense of all that? It was so
Right.
ridiculous.
Yeah, I actually made a meme.
Okay.
Um, I made a meme from that. It's on my page, but it says vegans
Uh huh.
appropriating every cause for their agenda, and it's like it's from SpongeBob, but it's like Patrick eating the burgers, but each burger is like a different movement. It's like health, climate change, ethics,
Right.
spirituality, sustainability, gender equality, world peace,
Right.
indigenous
Right.
lifeways, athletic performance, religion, social justice, racism. Like all of that has
All of
been
that.
under absorbed by this movement, and it's like all you got to do is just be vegan and that's it. So it's
Yeah.
like it's oversimplified reality to a point where it's like, man, like it's tough to kind of pull somebody out of that if they believe that their reality is changing that much from them just shopping from a different aisle in the store.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So maybe um, one question I'm extremely curious what you think about it and how you approach it also in your conversations. It's like how do we know what's the best approach to to kind of I don't know get these people back if that's a good way of saying it. Like
Mm.
how do we start conversations even? Like even that is not an easy thing. And then the question is what's the right way to approach the conversation? Like, are we trying to convince them of something? Are we trying to show them something? Like, how are we
Mm.
going to sort that problem out?
Yeah, I think definitely the way we don't do it is by mirroring the same approach of
Right.
like judgment, and of condemnation, because there's already enough of that, and you're only going to get more of that. So the thing is, what I tell people, like when you have more greater understanding, it's your responsibility to to express that understanding to people. So if you know like that there's this awareness that you have that they might not have, even though they might come with more animosity, you have to be more understanding because you're aware that the way they think and what they do is based off of what they believe. And so you have to find a way to introduce them to new information without triggering that sense of like I don't like you, or I'm trying to defeat you type of thing.
Because then you're
And
actually
and
doing the same thing. So you know
exactly,
better
yeah.
than them.
Right. So and sometimes, in the comments, I'll just give in and be like, "Oh, okay, maybe you do. Maybe you have all the answers, bro. Maybe you have all the answers, and maybe you're the one that's right, I'm still trying to figure it out, and this is what I've learned so far, but if you feel like but I know that the reason they're there is because whatever I post, whatever anyone posts,
Hmm.
they're just sharing their perspective. So if somebody gets triggered, it's because there is some internal conflict within that person. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
they wouldn't come in and say anything, because
Man.
if they were at peace and they knew what they knew, and they believed it truly, they would just move on like, oh, this person, that's funny. They don't know what they're talking about. But because they're triggered, they
Exactly.
can't restrain themselves from going in and commenting because there's some internal conflict. So you have to go with that awareness to be compassionate and kind, because we're kind of talking to ourselves whenever something triggers us. We're kind of talking to ourselves, you know. So we have to be compassionate and kind, you know,
Yeah.
even when there's misunderstanding, especially when there's misunderstanding, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I do it, I just try to be very educative and articulate this message to the best of my ability in a way that just brings information, understanding, and a shift of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe introduce something new, a new way of looking at it that hasn't been really shared or talked about. So my angle, I come from the spiritual community. I come from a community that's like was highly revolved around doing things for a spiritual reason and spiritual
Mm-hmm.
development. So that's kind of the angle that I take it. So what I'm doing now is showing them that you can still be spiritual and eat animal foods, you know, and that's actually the way it's always been, you know.
Right.
But but there hasn't been a lot of conversation around this, so it's a big avenue for me to just create content, because everything that you hear about spirituality is like, well, you got to be plant-based or raw, or you got to be this, and it's like, well, that's not what traditionally we've done. And so let me share this with you, and maybe you can enhance your perspective, you know, on this spirituality aspect. Look at me. Do I sound like I'm not aware? Do I sound like, even when people hear me articulate in the videos that I make, is I think it's so compelling because I'm not just like a meathead, like you gotta eat meat. Like, no, you know,
Plants
I'm
are
like
trying to kill
trying.
you.
Yeah, yeah. Like I don't come at it from that angle. I try to be like, because I do believe like being able to articulate yourself is like the new weapon. Like it's the new
100%.
superpower.
100%. Oh
Yeah.
man,
If you,
there's so much to go into when we talk again. Just quick comment about the thing you mentioned there with haters that get triggered very quickly. I believe the question shouldn't be why does someone offend me. I think the more accurate question is why do I get triggered by whatever the person says to me? I think that's a way more
right,
accurate question, because what if you're wrong? Like, that's such a profound question that everyone should be asking themselves, because you usually
right,
feel offended because someone disagrees with what you say. And then you interpret that as something offensive. That's, by the way, another problem that I have with the cancel culture, because you often get canceled for saying offensive things. Like, what is offensive? Literally every single word you say on that podcast, someone else can interpret as being offensive. Your presence can
right.
can be interpreted as an offensive thing to a vegan person. So that's kind of something that people probably need to realize. And I believe that coming from the perspective that you described of compassion and understanding, because you've been there too, and being and articulated in a way that actually appreciates where the people are coming from. I think that's the right approach. And generally, like, articulation means talking to people and having conversations. Is I've been talking to another friend, and that was also my answer. Like, how do we spread the message? I said we need to talk to people. Like, literally, that's the
Yeah,
only thing we can do. We can do something. We need to stop to shutting them down, canceling them, calling them names. No, 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 no. That's not the way forward. Actually having genuine conversations with people, trying to understand where they're coming from and appreciating their perspectives,
yeah,
and
for
getting on
sure.
from there.
And I have had the opportunity to have those conversations, and I do continue to open myself up to that because, you know, I think I want to be an example of that maturity that it takes to actually hold a conversation with somebody who sees the world differently than you. And you know, if we're not even able to you know, open ourselves to the opportunity, then there's already a problem there. We're never going to reach these understandings because we're
Yeah.
scared to confront the thing that you know we need to confront.
Yes, you need to constantly open yourself up to the possibility of failing and of being wrong, and thus you keep growing because of that. Stepping into the unknown, having these difficult, uncom- not comfortable conversations and interactions, and by that you get smarter and you spread wisdom along the way. So that's a beautiful thing you do. I'm
Absolutely.
appreciating what you're doing, man.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. I'm grateful.
awesome. So, Quetzal, thanks a lot for that you agreed to come to my podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really hope that we can do this again.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for having me, and I'm sure we will get a chance.
Awesome. Have a good time
All
there.
right. All right. Take care.